Welcome, everyone. We are so thrilled to have you, and we are especially thrilled to have Sandra Goldmark here with us today, sharing her time and her expertise. A big thank you to you. We are the Broadway Green Alliance, so we work to educate, motivate, and inspire the entire theater community and its patrons to adopt environmentally friendlier practices. And that's what you all are here to join in with us today doing. So thank you. And now I will turn the floor over to you, Sandra.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. So my name is Sandra Goldmark. I'm a professor at Barnard College, where I teach design, and I currently serve as the director of sustainability for the entire campus as well, which has been an interesting journey of getting from being a sort of regular theater designer and teacher to really trying to think about organizational change and institutional change. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today, is bringing those two threads of my work and sharing with you guys, obviously in the context of the coronavirus. I think that for many of us who are interested in climate action and in perhaps engaging more deeply within the theater industry, this, well, really for everybody, if you just read all of the New York Times, the coronavirus is opening up a huge question of what do we do when we come back? How do we return from this crisis? Are we going to return to business as usual? Do we even want to? Can we? Should we? They're really big questions and they're very daunting, and obviously we won't be able to answer all of them today, but I did hope that we could raise them and explore a little bit, hopefully, some concrete tools that if you are interested in kind of building positive change in your organizations, hopefully we'll explore some tools today, both specific to theater and then also some broader facilitation and change management tools that I've come across in my work on campus. So I don't know if any of you saw, I could do this in presenter view, couldn't I? Oh, well, is it all right if I do it this way? Can you see the stuff? It's just easier for me to keep it up on the side. Give me a thumbs down if this is horrible and small. Okay, thanks, guys. Pope Francis did a wonderful interview in the Tablet, which I don't know what that is, but it's some kind of maybe, I don't know, religious online magazine, but he was talking about coronavirus. And he said this: "I'm living this as a time of great uncertainty. It's a time for inventing, for creativity. What would I say to the young people? Have the courage to look ahead and to be prophetic." And as always, I'm a fan of Pope Francis, you might be able to tell, but as always, this really struck me. First of all, I felt like, in terms of theater people, this idea of thinking of this fallow time as a period of a time for inventing and creativity could be powerful. And we, in fact, have seen so much inventiveness and creativity already coming out of this from the theater community. And I thought this question of having the courage to look ahead, the idea that looking ahead is not easy, felt very resonant to me, because especially for us in theater, we don't know what is coming. We don't know what kind of jobs are going to be out there post-coronavirus. And thinking about changing industries and tackling climate change takes courage in any context, but especially, I think, in terms of the coronavirus. And his use of the word prophetic made me think a lot, because I thought, I think of a prophet as somebody who, it's like out on a mountaintop. I sort of thought like maybe predicting the future, what I thought prophets did, but I looked it up after reading this quote. And actually a prophet is supposed to be more of a guide or a teacher, that's all. And I thought that was a nicer way to think about it. The idea of this is something we can all do, is to sort of have the courage to look forward and have the courage to engage our communities in that question of shaping where we're heading post-coronavirus. So I recommend this interview if you're at all into the Pope. I also wanted to share with you a little bit of my journey of working on climate change in theater. It came, as for many people who work in theater, especially in design, from thinking about waste. It's a big starting point for a lot of people in terms of climate action, especially because it is so visible. It's a big starting point for me. Um, and as any of you who've been working on this for a long time will know, garbage and waste is a kind of wonderful gateway drug into larger climate action, because you follow the garbage and you can find anything. You can find all of the most exciting themes and challenges. They're all right there in the dumpster. So what happened for me was about, God, I don't know how long ago, maybe 10 years ago, I just started feeling that cognitive dissonance that so many people I know feel, where you are passionate about environmental issues, you're home rinsing your yogurt cups and bringing your little canvas bag to the grocery store, and then you go to work and you create thousands and thousands of pounds of waste every single show, every single season. And I've met so many theater people who have felt that cognitive dissonance, and it has, like me, has helped spur them to action. So I started first as a set designer, mainly starting to change the way I designed. I started, using a lot of found objects and trying to avoid buying certain materials. I started kind of, I like to think of it in secret, because at that time, it was just not, it just was hard. It was a hard sell. It was a hard sell to be like, let's not use any Luan. There were a few leaders out there already really doing the work, but it wasn't that common, and it was sort of tricky, when you're getting work and you're getting hired. And I was younger then, so I just would sort of started with secretly trying to use a lot of junk and garbage, and then I started getting more vocal about it, talking to producers and directors before I was hired and saying, this is how I really like to work. And if you feel like this won't work for your institution or for this show, like maybe I'm not the right hire. And that went well. People were open to it. The next phase, though, in my journey, was what I call moving beyond one fed up designer, where realizing that if I was going to make my whole set out of recycled this or that was great, but the next person coming in behind me might not. And so the impact on the total amount of waste and the impact on the system was really negligible, unfortunately. So I am lucky enough to teach at Barnard College, and my husband, Michael Banta, is the production manager there. And our colleague, Greg Winkler, is the TD. He's a good friend also from grad school. And we have an amazing costume shop manager named Cara Feely. So we have a really tight group at Barnard, and we were able to begin to think about it institutionally, this question of waste, and begin to think about how do we build a system so that it doesn't matter what the individual designer feels or doesn't feel about waste or the environment or the Pope or any of this stuff, but where you just could begin to build a system that reduces waste and reduces emissions in terms particularly of sets, costumes, and props. That's where we started. So the first tool that we looked at was the budget. Because we felt like logically, we were like well-trained little budgeters, and we felt like the budget is it's where the rubber meets the road. This is where, if you have a priority or you have a value, this is where it kind of gets put into play and gets tested. This is where things get tracked, and this is where this is one of the major leverage points in the institution for kind of making something institutionalized. So the very first thing that we did was we took our material budget line and we broke it out. Instead of just having one line for materials, which actually, again, there was an assumption buried in there, that really meant new materials, right? Because we just had that one budget line. And we split it, first we split it into two, here it's split into three. We realized that the very first step for us was to name and identify with a dollar value new materials as separate from used or reclaimed or stock materials. And then we started with some loose targets, like we didn't even know yet what our breakdowns were. So we said, well, what if the very first show we did it on, we said, well, what if we tried to use, 50% used materials? How hard would it be? we very quickly realized we needed to do some measuring and accounting of figuring out how to put a value on those used materials. So we had a stock like most theaters, and we used it kind of willy-nilly. Like many stocks, it was kind of the fallback, you know, like, oh, well, we don't have a nice new chair, so let's just pull a chair from stock. It doesn't have a number in the budget. It doesn't have a value assigned to it. And again, there's this kind of implicit assumption that it's like, it's a fallback. It's the second best. And we were starting to try to turn those assumptions upside down and actually say, actually, our stock is incredibly valuable. And maybe it should be our first port of call always. And maybe maybe new things are actually less valuable in a way because they come with all kinds of hidden costs in terms of environmental and social impacts of creating them. So we hired a student to help us figure out how to value our stock. We put dollar figures on everything that we have in scenery stock, and we came up with an average dollar value for every item in props and costumes, so that when we make a budget, you can see my cast of characters in the background. I think you guys are all probably used to this. This morning I did a call with my cat, like right here. So anyway, we started figuring out how to put dollar values onto everything in our budget, especially stock, and then how to set targets for it. And the key here, again, is to use the budget consciously as a leverage point to communicate priorities and to make them visible, to create accountability, and then most importantly, to create a habit, right? Because we realized from the very beginning what we wanted it to just become a habit. We didn't want to have to like convince everybody who comes in the door or even convince ourselves. 90% of the battle at Barnard has been retraining ourselves to have different habits in terms of what we purchase and how we think about the order of operations. So to recap, we valued the stock, figured out how to do dollar figures for everything in our stock, and we separated out a budget line for stock materials, used materials, and new materials in every scenery, prop, and costume budget. And we started tracking it. We also found a couple, I can't remember if I'm going to do this later, but I'll do it now. We also found a couple other important leverage points in the system to begin helping to reinforce this habit. One is in the hiring process. So we've started now when we hire designers, making sure before they're hired, we talk to them about this. We say we're going to have, you know, a budget, but it's going to be slightly different. Instead of just saying you have X dollars for materials, we're going to say you have X dollars for new materials and Y dollars for used materials. And we're going to hold you to those two budget lines, the same way we would hold you to one budget line. We're also asking them for buy-in early so that they can begin changing the way they design and thinking about it from the very beginning, because we don't believe that all of this work should just fall on the shoulders of production. We learned very early that doesn't work. It doesn't work if it's only the designer doing it. It doesn't work if it's only the production manager or the TD doing it. It has to be kind of everyone along the chain, from the producers and directors all the way right on through. So getting it into the hiring process was sort of our next step. We're actually now talking about putting it into our contracts to get it written down, to say the same way you might have your budget in a contract, to say you would have X, no more than this of new materials and a target of whatever, 50% or 70% or 80% used. The last interesting place in the system that we found that really helped us reinforce this habit, and this exists for all organizations, is in the marketing materials. So for us, we're a small college department, so we don't have a big marketing at all, but it's really our program. But we found that we were, tired. You're at the end of tech, and you're just, finishing everything up, and nobody really wants to do the numbers and figure out, what were the reuse numbers. So we put a little thing in the program that says this show is X% used and X% new. And then lo and behold, the woman who does the program will email us and sort of, ask for those numbers every time the program is due, and it provided a little internal accountability. And lo and behold, it was funny because we're sort of answering to ourselves. Like, it's not like we could just cut it out of the program, but once we put it in there and we got an email from somebody else saying, I need those numbers, it really increased the likelihood that we would really manage to do the tally on every show. And it also creates some public accountability for everybody involved in the show. If the numbers look kind of not great on a show, that's good. I mean, it's not good, but it's good in a way that it's not hidden away, that actually the whole world knows because it's right in our program. So the key there, and the points may differ in your organization, was to begin thinking about ways to make this priority visible at multiple steps in the process, create some accountability, and make it a habit. Again, the habit part was the key. So we were doing this. I sort of, in my typical way, did everything a little bit backwards, where I was like, we should just use materials and let's not buy anything new, was my first thing, without really knowing what the emissions reduction impact would be. Like, is this an effective tool for reducing emissions? But at some point we realized we needed some data behind this, of why, like, what's the point of trying to boost your reuse numbers? And so we hired a consulting firm called Gotham 360 to do some numbers for us. So they analyzed a show called Some Hero. They analyzed it. The middle one is As Built, which was about 50% used materials. And then they redid the carbon footprint as if we had done it with all used materials at the top, and as if we had built it with all new materials. So they just ran 3 scenarios up for us so that we could get a sense of what the emissions reduction impact from sets, props, and costumes was. And you can see that it was significant. So we were thrilled to discover this. It meant that all of the work was not useless, and that it gave us a really good argument for continuing to push reuse. And it worked well for us because by pushing reuse, we learned that we get a real emission savings, but we don't have to do a lot of complicated figuring or calculating on every show, if you know what I mean. Reuse is a really good, Susan, did you have a question? You're muted.
Hi, Sandra, my question is this is all sets, props, costumes, right? So it doesn't include anything that uses any utilities like electricity for lighting and sound.
No, that is next up for us. We haven't done any sound or lights yet.
Okay, I just wanted to make that point because I do think that from the Broadway point of view, we're looking at a lot of what are we saving with utilities first versus these things first. So I just wanted to say that out loud to the group because I do think that this is really impressive and really great. But I think it's exactly the opposite of how we're starting, but it gives me tons of ideas of what we could be doing. So I think it's fantastic, but I just wanted to make the point.
It's a good point, and it's actually a really interesting point because it's following on a lot of the work that's been done broadly in cities. A lot of, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the 3 scopes of emissions, scopes 1, 2, and 3. Most emissions are broadly broken out into 3 scopes. Scopes 1 and 2 are your electricity, your heating and cooling, your utilities, as Susan said. It's buildings and energy, right? And they are a significant portion of our emissions, but there is another scope called Scope 3. And Scope 3 is everything else. It's your indirect emissions. So it's everything that you purchase. It's all of your waste. It's all of your airplane travel. Now, we're obviously not touching airplane travel, but all of these emissions associated with essentially production of material products is Scope 3 emissions. And I happen to know from Barnard, because of another study that we did at Barnard for the whole campus, that these are a significant portion of an organization's carbon emissions. So I would actually encourage all of you, I'm not just discouraging you from working on your utilities, you absolutely should, but to really look carefully at the material impact, because at Barnard for our campus, we ran some rough numbers in 2015. It's at least 50% of our total emissions fall into Scope 3. So at some point at Barnard, we should, maybe this would be a good project, Susan, maybe the next show we'll run the numbers and compare our electricity, basically our scopes 1 and 2 and our this stuff. But in any case, the ideas, whether you're working on material impacts or energy utilities impacts, the basic idea holds in terms of creating different habits. And also, what I realized at some point is that what we're doing is we're creating a new limit, right? Like we're saying now that we have a new budget line, we have a new limit that we're not supposed to hit more than X percentage of new materials. And this has something that I have had some interesting conversations about in different places. Sometimes people saying, well, we're really not comfortable sort of creating this kind of limit for our designers or for our directors or for ourselves or whatever. You know, a feeling maybe that it would hamper the artistic expression, or maybe compromise the production artistically in some way. And I want to basically, my stance on this is that that's BS. And here's why. We face limits all the time in theater. We have budgets. We have load-in schedules. We have loading dock doors that are a certain size. We have columns in the middle of the stage. We have all kinds of limits. And we are 100% accustomed to being hired and being told that this is a parameter within which you have to work. So to me, to say that we can't consider environmental considerations as a limit for some artistic reason is I just don't accept it anymore. And I think that it's untenable at this point, basically. So I actually think it's an opportunity to say, this is a limit. It's a budget, right? This is a budget, and we can put it down on paper just like any budget, a labor budget, a time budget, whatever kind of limit you've got. And in fact, as we all know from working in theater, sometimes these limits can be fuel for creativity. They can be an absolutely amazing way to make you think differently about the work you're doing, or to help you trim excess fat from your design, or help you really hone in on what's important. So for me, it's not a question of saying, you know, how can we do this work without imposing limits? It's a question of simply acknowledging that this is a limit, and we need to admit and figure out how to budget for it, just like we budget for every other limit. So from there, I wanted to switch to this next section, because that was sort of the work we did at Barnard and thinking about our habits and our limits there. But you all may be working on different parts of climate change within your organization. And there's a broader question of beginning to think about how to facilitate change or accelerate it or introduce it. And that applies to more than just, you know, sets or costumes or props or whatever you're working on, but it's more thinking about where you are and what you're trying to impact. So I was wondering if in the chat here, where is the chat? If we could, where's the chat?
Bottom of the
Why does it say
screen.
Q&A? It says Q&A weirdly.
Next a little
Maybe because I'm screen sharing. Anyway, if you can see the chat, that's good.
Yep,
Why don't you guys, if you guys could throw into the chat, here, I'm going to just stop sharing for a minute. There it is. There's the chat. If you guys can throw into the chat, what are some of the familiar barriers you face in your organizations, or that you're used to encountering when you work on these? And I'm just going to like try to copy them down onto this slide. How to manage stock effectively with a small staff. Low waste, more work, costs. Larger labor costs, yes, okay. Labor costs. Bandwidth. / small staff. Touring. Sort of each venue. General inertia, apathy, what we do doesn't matter. It's a big one. General inertia, apathy, what we do doesn't matter, totally. Habits, like habits, someone says, habits, I'm going to say also like, yeah, that's what it is. Habits of buy-in from leadership. Yes. Getting peers to change ways that have been around for so long. Habits from forever. Audience expectations. / I would add to that maybe fear that you won't be meeting them. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe the idea that it's going to look different somehow. Right. Concern that it's not as good. Time. Yes, time. Time. Mm-hmm. An entire misunderstanding / no understanding. We did a play on climate change 3 seasons ago. That's great. Okay. That is great. I'm going to throw these up. I feel like for me, these break out into kind of the big pictures here are bandwidth issues having to do with time / labor or costs, right? Like just the ability to think about doing things differently sometimes can seem completely impossible. Inertia / apathy, I think, is kind of another headline. And maybe fear, maybe sort of resistance to change just as a basic human habit. So, and then there were several that were about like the worry about perceived quality regarding, those are specifically surrounding reuse, but I think these actually apply broadly. Maybe you're not working on reuse, you're working on backstage or running the show or energy and electricity, and these big ones apply to all of those. So let's just hold these kind of sad little barriers here for a second. We won't go through them one by one, but hopefully some of the tools that I'm going to share with you now will we can think about these and come back to how we can help address them. But also, it's interesting to note that here we are in the coronavirus moment, and in a weird way, some of these barriers are at least temporarily gone. They may come back with a vengeance, but for now, in this strange moment, there's a sense, I believe, among many people that things are different. Maybe they'll stay different, maybe they won't, but we know that right now, at least, there is in some ways a little bit of space to think about what we're doing and how we're going to come back. So I've been sort of thinking about that a lot in terms of Barnard, not Barnard Theater Department, but sort of the larger climate action work on campus, how we can seize that moment and really move forward and not just return to business as usual. So now I just want to take you through a couple of the concrete tools that I have found as a sort of person trying to push for changes on a campus and in a theater department, and share some of the resources with you, and then we can have some discussion. So one of the greatest resources I found is this woman, Leith Sharp. She was one of the first sort of sustainability people at Harvard, and now she's kind of doing a sort of train the trainer or teach the teacher thing, and she has this amazing one-week curriculum at Harvard School of Public Health. It's in the fall, but she also goes to ASHE if any of you go there. And there's also this great video. It's like a 1 hour, it's her just talking for an hour. It's really fun and great. And she kind of goes through her whole philosophy. So I guess I'll somehow share these slides after Molly. Maybe Molly can figure out how to do that. But that way you guys can have these links. And especially if you're like stuck home with coronavirus, watch this video. For me, it was like life-changing, or hopefully not with the virus, stuck home because of coronavirus. So Leith was a great touch point, and one of her main tools is really about understanding and leveraging and activating power within your organization. So she has come up with this framework of these two operating systems in every organization. She calls one the adaptive operating system, and the other the command and control operating system. Command and control, she sometimes calls it the hierarchical operating system. That's the one that's very familiar, that org chart, right? Like, we all are very familiar with an org chart. It's like there's a person here and 2 people report to that person and 3 people report to that person. And we're very familiar with that. But what she's pointing out is that there's an additional operating system in an organization, which is much more fluid, much more organic. It's people meeting informally by the water cooler. It's ad hoc committees getting together to work on things. It's theater is actually an amazing example of an institution that moves very fluidly between these two operating systems, and actually has practices in place to help support the healthy functioning of both. Because one of Leith's main points is that actually, in order to move change through an organization, you need to consciously understand these two operating systems and understand how they work together and what they do. So the hierarchical operating system is very good at like allocating resources, scaling good ideas, moving certain types of information through the organization. It's not so good, the hierarchical, at, for example, coming up with new ideas or piloting them or thinking outside the box. The adaptive system is really good at that. That is why, you know, design meetings often have a very adaptive operating system quality, because we're literally trained and supposed to get working in that kind of fluid, non-hierarchical exchange system in order to generate designs. Like, we know that it's a tool that's available to us. And so beginning to understand beyond just the design meeting, but how those systems work in your organization more broadly can be a really powerful way to begin activating different power points in the organization. And this works even for very small organizations. And it's something that I started doing at Barnard really, really consciously in the beginning, doing what I called activating, which meant trying to find places and little groups within the organization where people were doing climate change work, and kind of helping light them up, helping connect them to other ones, helping to get little ideas flowing. And it's very important. The next few tools are, this is another really, really helpful one. This is Greener You. And there's a woman, Dallas Scott, there, who I took a facilitation workshop from. And she kindly gave me this link to a video that she did on, it's a workshop, unfortunately, that like you would not be participating in the workshop because it's a recording of it. But she just goes through all her bag of tricks of how to be a facilitator and how to facilitate for organizational change. So I wanted to share this resource. More of these key points, both from Leith and from Dallas and from some of the readings I've been doing. One is this idea of de-risking, and you'll see this in the Leith video, but the question here, this goes back a little bit to that question of fear, buy-in from leadership. De-risking is a really important skill. And what this means is finding ways to make it easier, create some safety, some psychological safety around an idea, so that leadership, and particularly so that that hierarchical system can feel appropriate level of comfort or an appropriately low level of risk in order to be willing to try an idea. Pilot programs are a great way to do this. It's really, really simple, but if you just say, let's just pilot this, let's just do it on one show, it works wonders. And then before you know it, it's 2 shows and 3 shows. And before you know it, everybody forgot that it was a pilot and you're just doing it. Another one can be finding champions within the organization, people who are willing to help. But if you don't have a champion, a pilot can be an amazing tool. The second one is alleviating pain points. Again, this is a really key one because a lot of the pain points that we discussed in that earlier slide are very real and are very important to address and can't just be ignored, like especially in theater, the bandwidth question. People really are working really hard. Like it's not like they're just saying, I don't have time for this. They probably really don't have time for it. Or you have to assume that that is true. So if you can find a way to have your program also alleviate another pain point, it's like a 9900% more chance that it will get picked up. So on the Barnard campus, for example, I've been really pushing reuse outside of theater as well. And I was getting stuck. I was getting really, really stuck. Like I was convinced my idea was so good. It was such a wonderful idea. And like, I couldn't figure out why it wasn't getting picked up right away. And then I sort of backed off for a while and I started listening to some other pain points. Particularly, there was a lot of concern and work on campus about access and affordability for students to particularly art supplies. And so I teamed up again, found another champion. I teamed up with the VP for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And we began to really make the case that reuse was not just about sustainability, but that it was also a potential solution for some questions of affordability and student access. And it is now taking off like gangbusters because people feel like it's a win-win-win. And instead of adding something to their plate, they feel like I'm taking something off their plate. I'm solving 2 problems. One that I cared a lot about. Well, I care about both problems, but I'm tailoring the message about reuse to the particular needs of my organization. Because it wasn't that people weren't interested in reuse, it's just they were feeling so stressed out about everything else that they needed to hear it as a way to work on more than one thing at once in order for it to kind of have the lift that it needed. This is just a personal one for me. Don't be afraid to be the squeaky wheel. Like sometimes if you're really working on these, you can just feel like, oh, everybody's gonna just be so sick of me. It's okay. Be nice and then they won't get so sick of you. This is one from down here from below, from Adrienne Marie Brown, Emergent Strategies, Listen with Love. I'm teaching a course right now called Change and Climate Change, and we've been studying Gandhi. And this sort of also connects to Gandhi's concept of satyagraha, which is nonviolence. The idea being that even if you're working maybe with somebody who's like super difficult or you feel like is just not an ally or really isn't interested, to somehow continue to bring a really loving energy to those interactions. And it can be, it's easy when you're like, feel like you're all on the same team, but when you do encounter people who just don't care about it or kind of want you to go away, I thought that the idea of listen with love is really useful. And it's something, again, I think we're very good at in theater. I think we're very good at, for example, in design meetings or rehearsals, at presenting ideas and treating them very respectfully and really seeing what people are bringing to the table in a loving way. And I think that that is a skill in theater that we can apply to this work as well. Biomimicry is a great tool. I'm not going to go into that one, but I just wanted to name it, especially, again, the idea of mutualism, of thinking about how different change practices can support other people in the organization. And down here are 2 great books, Emergent Strategies by Adrienne Marie Brown and Leverage Points, which is just an article in terms of thinking about how to change a system. And then I just wanted to share this idea, again, thinking about activating your organization and your role. Like, how do you balance what you're trying to do as an individual and being that squeaky wheel and being willing to push for it with building coalitions and in a savvy way, creating a movement. So is this going to work?
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow.
You guys, do I have to full screen it, or is it okay like this? Give me a thumbs up if I should full screen it.
Hard to hear.
Hard to hear. All right, then I will just narrate. Let me full screen it. I can do this. View. I'll make one thing. No, that was wrong. Duh, sorry. Well, I'll play it and I'll put it on mute. Come on. Okay, can you hear me though? Okay, so what we have here is the lone kook. This is you guys, I'm assuming, because you all showed up for this webinar. And this is the person who's like, I'm gonna make change in theater and I'm here dancing my freak dance, and it's all by himself, right? And the key is, here is what's called the first follower. And this guy is actually the most important thing here, because what he's doing is he is de-risking this activity for everybody else. Everybody knows that kook and they are like, whatever, I don't care about that. But when the guy with the green t-shirt comes in, he's making it okay for everybody else to join. But it's still two kooks, but all of a sudden it's a group. And then you'll see soon we get our third follower. And what the guy who's narrating this video points out, here's our third follower. So now we actually have a legitimate group. And what we have is the first guy has treated the first and second follower as equals. So they are coming in and they are part of this movement and they are equally leading and kooky. And they've de-risked it. And now all of a sudden we have 5 people, and all of a sudden the tide is turning. And it's almost getting to the point where if you're not out there dancing on the grass, you look like a kook. And here they all go. Love it. And that's it. Everybody's in. They're all in. And now the people sitting on the grass are the ones who are out of it. And so the key that this, let me stop sharing for a sec. The key here is that idea of the first followers and really bringing in people with you if you are that first person in your organization, or if you're the second person, bringing in the third and creating a group, within your larger group. And I think the kooky dancing video is a good one, because it also shows that it's helpful to be doing something with joy and something that looks like a hell of a lot of fun. And if you can create positive feedback from those people, in terms of, get your marketing department to write an article about the second and third follower, get your local newspaper to write on it, get some way to get audience feedback. If you can get sort of positive feedback to those early people joining you, you get a lot of payoff. So I'm going to sort of stop talking right now and turn it over to a conversation. I did want to acknowledge really quickly 2 things again. One is fear, right? Because I think that fear of change and inertia was a big barrier that people mentioned. And I think in the coronavirus moment, it deserves a little bit of its own special mention as well, because we don't know what's going to happen. There may be people who are not going to have jobs after this. There may be people who don't have jobs now. There are many people in the theater community who are facing now and in the future serious financial troubles. There may be theater companies that are facing, financial stress at a really serious level. So it may mean that some of those barriers we mentioned earlier may feel in a weird way even stronger, and it may just mean choosing the battle correctly and really thinking carefully about those pain points. I just had this recently at a Barnard meeting where a program that we had been looking at before coronavirus, and internal carbon tax, just started to feel completely unpalatable to people given the budget shortfalls we're going to have next year. But another program, again, the reuse thing that was having trouble getting traction, all of a sudden people couldn't get enough of it because we realized it would also help alleviate some financial strain on our students when they came back. So to think through that fear and just acknowledge it, but not let it paralyze, I think is hopefully the one way forward. And certainly we've already seen in the theater community an amazing kind of response to this moment, with all of the, the mask making being just one example of what's been going on, of people really rising up, finding different and creative ways to apply their talents. I hope that we can kind of carry on with that inspiration. This was one last thing from my class when we were studying Gandhi. This is sort of in response to the people who said in the barriers section, who said that we're so small, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what we do. We're just one little show. We're just one little flat made of one little piece of Luan or whatever it is. Gandhi's nephew at some point apparently asked Gandhi, how can I emancipate India? It's so big. I can't do this. I'm just one person. It's not possible. And this is what Gandhi said. He said, you're not here to emancipate India. You're here to emancipate yourself. And in that you will find the larger battle. And I thought, for me, this was so inspiring, because obviously our one show and our one little department, it's not the answer. It's not the end. But Gandhi was somebody who worked on such an enormously vast scale, and yet he never forgot the importance and the power of each individual member of the movement working where they are and working on themselves. So I thought I would share that. But now I wanted to open it up to a group, either conversation or chat, whatever you guys prefer, about the what. So I've given you what we did at Barnard, and I've given you a little bit of some of my tools of how I've been approaching this work. And I would love to brainstorm a little bit in our group what people think our industry can do when we come back, how coronavirus might open up change within our institutions and our organization and our industry.
I've got the chat open. If people want to add anything in there. Oh, got a hand.
Last week, I don't remember what exactly was said, and maybe Susan, Molly, you can help me fill in the blanks, but it was something about asking designers to come to the table with 3 design ideas, one of which being the green idea. And I'm literally going into a meeting after this about writing that into our design packets that we give to designers. I don't know if there's any more insight on that, but I love this idea of trying to get their brains started there and then moving forward from that. And Sandra, this whole bit is going to really aid me in that meeting. Thank you.
I think I'm the one who brought that up then, and it was in response, Sandra, just so you know, to people, a producer saying, I'm only the producer, what can I do? And the answer was, you can ask your people to bring you ideas that are green ideas among the ideas they bring to you. So it speaks to what you talked about, Sandra, about not limiting their artistic muscles and not saying to them, you can't do this, you can only do that. But it was saying, at least in a commercial sense, have a range of things, have at least one green concept in the things you're presenting, so the producers actually have a choice. And so it's the habits, it's the introduction of it, it's the consideration that might be possible, instead of,
I think it's great. Yeah, it's de-risking. It's that de-risking for both the designer and the producer. It's a high risk ask to say, bring me a green design. Bring me 3 designs or bring me one green idea within 3 is a very simple and effective way to de-risk something. And I bet you it'll wind up it's going to wind up in the final product just because it was introduced in a psychologically safe way. Edward's got his hand up.
Hi, I think that's a wonderful idea, and behind it, I have to be a little bit of a devil's advocate. I mean, I am very passionate about green and sustainable design, and I always try and incorporate it, but unless you're intending to pay them 3 times as much, it might be better to phrase it like, we would like to work towards like being a third sustainable with this show. So to like have them start with it from the beginning, as opposed to asking them to present 3 different, design ideas, like our time is money in terms of that. So to work towards like, we want to work towards like Sandra's wonderful model of, we want to be buying, I don't know, was it 2/3 or 1/2 new materials and 1/2 sustainable materials? And it doesn't have to be like set in stone, but like, this is our goal that we're trying to work towards. So please keep that in mind from the beginning. I might suggest that. That's all.
I don't think any of us expected the designers would do complete presentations based on 3 concepts. I think the idea was to have early on a conversation about 3 concepts, and then hopefully the producer would possibly choose the green one, or would say, let's try to use part of the green one. So I don't think anybody's thinking to let somebody go through 3 times the amount of work up front. I think it's just about having the conversation early on so that can get incorporated in the design process earlier, instead of having somebody design a whole show and then saying to them, okay, now cut out 2/3 of it because we want it to be green.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one early tactic, I forgot to mention this earlier, that I started doing, and this addresses a little bit of the labor cost thing, is very early on a show, I would try to get some money moved from materials to labor in order to create myself some wiggle room for basically for reuse, because as some people have pointed out, sometimes you need to send a van all over the city to go get materials, or you need to hire somebody to pull staples from something or whatever it is. And so to acknowledge that early, to say, let's get that budget sort of need moving early, or at least earmarked.
That's especially relevant too right now, with labor being our biggest question, and maybe allocating more to labor so that we can employ people. And
exactly. And this is, again, with alleviating pain points. This was one of the best things that we discovered at Barnard. And everybody asks us this. They say, are all your reused productions more expensive? Or, is this going to increase my budget, basically, Miss Green Designer? And what I have found consistently is that it's not a budget add, it's a budget shift. And we're consistently moving money from materials to labor. And so what I think is, to me, this is a good thing. Like, I would much rather spend my budget on, somebody driving around, getting materials than ordering something from Home Depot. We've been able to use our budget savings at Barnard to increase our design fees, and we've been able to make the case to the department, to the college, that we need to, because in the past there was some resistance to shifting money over into stipends and into labor, but we have a rationale now. We say, look, we're spending less on Home Depot or whatever and more on people. And certainly coming out of COVID, this is going to be a strong argument to say, let's just put the money into labor. Stephanie? Or Nate?
Howdy. Thank you to the BGA and for the presentation. I really appreciate what you're doing. And I want to echo and thank you for the encouragement to being the squeaky wheel, because as you're asking about transitioning after COVID into what comes after, we're already in a moment of pause and conversation. So I want to use it as a moment to encourage myself to be a part of the conversation of what comes next. We're already having to evaluate how it's going to be possible to continue forward. And like you were saying, the more that we tie green initiative and the climate crisis as a moment to build something better, cheaper. Within our own communities, it is reflective of the larger scale approach that a lot of activist organizations are realizing. You have to talk about it as a positive thing. We already have the energy efficiency options that are cheaper, save more money, are more just, all of the things that theater companies want to be and care about. It is a way to save money. It is a way to do things more justly. So I just thank you for the encouragement to be that person in the room making that conversation. And I would encourage everybody else to do the same for sure.
And to find the other people in the organization who are thinking it or doing it, and shout them up. Shouting up sounds bad, but I meant it in a good way. You know what I mean? Michael, I see you asked in the chat about the carbon tax. We were trying to do at Barnard and we haven't given it up, but the idea was there's a lot of places have started an internal carbon tax, usually about energy again. So like you're the biology department or building the med school, you have an energy bill, and places are taxing that, like Yale is kind of the best example. And it's usually for scopes 1 and 2 emissions. We were thinking of doing it at Barnard for certain scope 3 behaviors. The most relevant one for theater is air travel, where we were thinking maybe what we'll do is every airline ticket that we purchase as a campus, we put a tax on it, and we can either use that tax to pay for offsets for the travel or sustainability initiatives. And we might do some other behaviors. The ideas of a carbon tax, an internal carbon tax, is a way internally to shift money and sort of fund other initiatives, and also perhaps shift behavior. So for us at Barnard, we were interested in testing it out. Like if we had a little carbon tax on airplane flights, would it impact behavior? We don't know yet. We're doing a very tiny pilot, but the coronavirus, like, you know, nobody's flying. Our pilot is screwed because nothing is happening. But the idea is interesting, and it's certainly one that I think theater, you know, as an industry needs to think about air travel and think about how we're going to address that. And it's going to be one of the major emitters for many, many organizations. And so to think about how to tackle that is certainly a challenge, and an internal carbon tax might be one way to at least begin.
I'll give that's a little preview.
Stage.
I'll just say a little preview for those who want to learn more about carbon tax, dividends, etc. next week and want to take a deep dive, can join Michael for next week's Green Learning session for those who might want to deep dive into what those are and what the current bills are in Congress and local. You can read all about it and learn more about that next week.
Oh, awesome. I will join that one. Someone said not design production. This is a good one. Actors and stage managers. God, so much. Okay, well, right. I always focus on production because that's just what I do. But there is a whole bunch of sort of operational stuff that happens once the show is up and running. Maybe Molly has some good tips on that one.
Yeah, in terms of what, if you want to, again, deep dive, we are continuing sessions that will focus on those particular elements in the weeks to come. But in the meantime, on our website at broadwaygreen.com, there is a page called the NRDC Greening Advisor. And that has broken down by element. So actors, front of house, backstage, specific detailed tips about what you can do by department. So I find that incredibly helpful. Stage managers, if you work in admin, how you can look to organize your admin offices, your tech shops. So I really recommend going there and taking a look so that you can specify to what you do in the theater.
And I guess I would say, like, blanket, I think the thing to do is to speak up, is to like either be that kooky guy dancing or the second guy or the third guy or the 18th guy if you're an organization that's further along. But like, the more people speak up and make noise about it, politely and happily and joyfully, and also in a problem-solving way, the better. Like if you're at an organization where there's like a water cooler that's like just driving you crazy because you feel like it doesn't need to be there, or it could be tap water or whatever, email somebody about it, pester about it. If you don't leave the work to somebody else in the organization, because even if there is a person, like a sustainability person, that person is like struggling to get the work done. So if you can sort of help move the changes through at any level, it really helps form that crowd on the lawn, which is what we want, I think.
See, we're at 2:03, so maybe we'll do one last question. We have a hand in the air. Edward?
Hi, just a couple of quick things. This is so great. And I wanted to point out about also persistence, because I've gotten a no from an organization the first time that I worked for them, and then, but it got them to at least think about it that first time. And then when I went back, I was able at the new school last year to do like a fully sustainable show. And I think I hope and I assume that Sandra, you and Mike Banta are promoting this at USITT and stuff for universities, and that's really going to sort of educate the next level. I also just wanted to put a plug in for all of you who are in the New York area. I've worked with Ken Larson in the Hillbolic Arts, and I'm posting some photos of a show that I did that was probably like 95% recycled materials. Now, they're a commercial scene shop. They do it purely because they have a lot of space, and they just, but you know, I'll take it if I can get it, you know, like whatever their reason, whether it's economic or really from a sustainable way, they save everything, and they're amazing at reusing items. And I just want to sort of put a plug in for them. That's all.
Great, thank you. Sandra, any last words you'd like to close us out on before we?
I'm just going to put up, we can have, if anybody, we can have a little conversation. I wanted to put this poem by Václav Havel up, which I love. And then we can just have any last comments or chit chat.
Great. I just then want to say a big thank you to everyone for joining us today. We can, you know, those who want to stick around for comments, final questions, we'll hang on here for a little while longer. But a big thank you to you, Sandra, for joining us and for this fabulous presentation. It was incredibly informative. I know we all, myself included, learned a lot. And for those of us who want to, anyone who wants to keep learning, we have more learning sessions coming up. You can learn about them on BroadwayGreen.com along with all of our other resources. I'd encourage all of you on here who want to continue to keep talking and join this community of advocates, if you haven't already, to consider being a green captain for your organization. You know, we have so many representatives from around the country. If you'd like to learn more, please reach out to me or Chrissy via the website. And again, join us for Earth Day. We're marking the 50th anniversary of Earth Day this coming week on April 22nd, beginning with a kickoff on Sunday, April 19th. So this Sunday, that is this Sunday. It's important to mark time during this quarantine, right? So join us there, and you can learn more on our website and on social. So thank you so much again, everyone, for joining us. It's been such a pleasure spending this time with you.